there is a moment quiet and unannounced when you realize you're not really making your own choices. The room is silent, but your mind is not. You sit with your back against a cold wall, wondering why everything feels so heavy. Not in your body and your being. Something else is steering your reactions, shaping your fears, deciding who you're allowed to be. And that something doesn't speak in words. It manipulates through emotion, shame, guilt, anxiety, unspoken obligation. You want to say no, but you say yes. You want to walk away, but you stay. You want to scream, but you smile. And you begin to wonder, who is actually in control? This is not just anxiety. This is not just fear. This is enslavement to something you haven't yet named. And Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's what this is. Invisible fate written not in the stars, but in your silence. You weren't born to be controlled. But you were born into a world that taught you how to submit quietly, efficiently, psychologically. It didn't have to chain you, it just had to convince you that you were already chained. You were trained to abandon your power in exchange for acceptance. You were trained to avoid confrontation because peace was more important than truth. You were trained to doubt your own instincts because questioning was inconvenient to the people who benefited from your silence. And now, here you are. Not broken, but blurred. Not weak, but unclaimed. The cost of that training wasn't just your voice. It was your authority over yourself. Because nothing controls you unless you let it. Unless you believe the thought that says you can't. Unless you agree with the fear that says you shouldn't. Unless you internalize the story that says you're not allowed. The control doesn't come from outside. It never did. The control is born the moment you surrender your center and outsource your truth to someone else's expectations. Most people aren't aware they've been possessed not by spirits, but by ideas. Ideas that speak in the first person. I must make them proud. I can't disappoint them. I need to be liked. I shouldn't be so selfish. None of these are your original thoughts, but they wear your voice like a mask. They've become so entangled with your identity that questioning them feels like betraying yourself. But that's the trick. The real betrayal already happened when you stopped asking who you were beneath the programming. This is what Alfred Adler meant when he said that much of our suffering comes not from the trauma itself, but from the conclusions we drew about ourselves because of it. You were neglected, so you concluded that you must not be worthy. You were punished for being honest, so you concluded that truth is dangerous. You were ignored when you needed connection, so you concluded that your needs are a burden. And now, you obey those conclusions. You shape your entire life around protecting them. But the enemy is no longer out there. It's the prison inside you that you still believe is necessary. This is how the psyche becomes ruled by ghosts. You keep reacting to people not as they are, but as symbols. The angry boss becomes your disapproving father. The emotionally distant partner becomes your neglectful mother. The authority figure becomes the punisher from childhood you could never rebel against. And each time you obey, appease, submit, you think you're being wise. But you're just reenacting a drama that has nothing to do with now. You don't want freedom, you want safety from a pain that already happened. And you will never be free. As long as you believe you still owe your past an apology. Every moment you avoid saying what you really think, every time you shrink yourself to avoid conflict, every time you numb the discomfort instead of listening to it, you're choosing the comfort of control over the chaos of truth. But nothing controls you unless you keep protecting what once hurt you. And the most dangerous part of that is it feels like survival. And so the question becomes, how do you reclaim what you never truly lost, but were taught to abandon? The answer begins with confrontation, not of others, but of yourself. You must look honestly at where you've been complicit in your own suppression. You must ask, what am I still afraid to say? Who am I still trying to please? What truth am I avoiding? Because I'm scared of what will happen if I speak it. These aren't rhetorical questions. They are keys, because every place you feel controlled is a place where your permission is still missing. And power doesn't return with rage, it returns with recognition. You don't have to destroy anyone to become free. You just have to stop betraying yourself. Again and again and again. There's a subtle violence in always compromising who you are to make others comfortable. A quiet mutilation of the self that no one sees because it's internal. You go to work. You smile. You say what's expected. You manage emotions that aren't even yours. You carry the weight of everyone's needs, but your own voice is the one that never makes a sound. And somewhere inside you start to rot. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in slow erosion. You become bitter, exhausted, numb, and still you perform. Because the pain of being misunderstood feels more dangerous than the pain of being invisible. That's how deep the control runs. You've confused survival with self-erasure. You've learned how to vanish while appearing functional. But beneath the surface, your soul is screaming. This is what Jung called the shadow, the repressed truth of who you are. It's not just anger or desire or fear. It's also your voice, your instinct, your power. The parts of you that were labeled too much or not enough are still alive. But they've gone underground. And anything buried in the unconscious doesn't disappear. It festers. It begins to act on your behalf. That's why your body reacts with anxiety before your mind understands why. That's why you suddenly lash out or collapse or isolate. Because something inside you is fighting for its life. It's not trying to ruin you. It's trying to return. But every time you silence it, you reinforce the illusion that your wholeness is a threat. And the longer you hold that belief, the more you will unconsciously seek situations that prove it. You'll choose relationships where you feel voiceless, jobs that demand your obedience, friends who reward your weakness but flinch at your strength. You won't call it control, you'll call it fate, familiarity, even love. But it's not love, it's self-abandonment masquerading as harmony. Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot command himself must obey." And it's true. If you don't reclaim your internal authority, you will always be ruled not just by people but by patterns. And the most dangerous patterns are the ones that look like your personality. The ones you say are just how I am. You think you're being kind, but you're just conflict avoidant. You think you're being agreeable, but you're terrified of being disliked. You think you're being humble, but you've forgotten how to own your truth without shame. None of this is your fault, but it is your responsibility. Because you are the only one who can see where the wires were crossed, and you are the only one who can untangle them. No one can rescue you from a prison whose walls are built out of your own silence. This is where the real work begins, not in blaming the world, not in raging at the past, but in asking what part of me did I give away to survive, and is it time to take it back? This isn't about becoming defiant. It's about becoming conscious. Because if you don't know who you are beneath your defense mechanisms, you'll never stop mistaking fear for truth. You'll keep reacting to life instead of responding to it. You'll think you're being realistic when you're just scared. You'll think you're compromising when you're actually self-betraying. You'll call it letting go when it's really just giving up. But deep down, a part of you knows. It always has. And that part of you is still waiting to be seen. Not because it's dramatic or loud or even angry, but because it's tired of being forgotten. Sometimes the most radical act of freedom is not to fight back, but to stop lying. To stop saying yes when you mean no. To stop nodding when your soul is screaming. To stop shrinking just to keep the peace. That's not peace. That's slow spiritual suicide. And it creates a life where nothing feels real and everything feels just out of reach. And then you wonder why you're exhausted, why you can't sleep, why your chest tightens when you walk into certain rooms or hear certain names. It's because your body remembers where your mind still refuses to look. The control didn't start outside. It started the moment you stopped trusting yourself. So how do you begin to trust again? You start small. You start by noticing the moment before the yes, the hesitation before the smile, the twist in your stomach when you agree with something you secretly resent. That's where your power lives, in the micro decisions that shape your reality. You don't need to change everything overnight. You just need to stop pretending. Because every time you choose truth over performance, you chip away at the illusion that you're powerless. And over time, the illusion shatters. The question is, are you willing to feel the discomfort of being real in order to escape the numbness of being controlled? Because there will be a cost. Freedom is never free. It will cost you false relationships, outdated identities, and illusions of safety. But what you gain is something far more valuable yourself. Not the version of you that was shaped to survive, but the one that was born to lead your life from within. There's a reason the world teaches you that strength looks like control. Control over others, over outcomes, over appearances. But that's not real power, it's compensation. It's what the unconscious does when it forgets how to stand in its own center. Real power isn't about domination or manipulation. It's about presence, alignment, integrity. And those are terrifying things to reclaim because they demand that you stop outsourcing your authority. They demand that you face every place you've said, "I had no choice." Because the truth is, you did. You just believed the cost was too high. You didn't want to lose them. You didn't want to disappoint them. You didn't want to be alone. But each time you gave in to fear, you confirmed the lie that you were powerless. And the unconscious took note. It started rewriting your identity around that belief. Now you don't just feel powerless, you think that's who you are. But it's not. It never was. The lie of powerlessness is seductive. It spares you from responsibility. It protects you from risk. It gives you a script, "I couldn't help it." That's just how life is. I guess I'm just unlucky. But what it really protects is the ego, not the self. Because the ego doesn't want truth. It wants control. It wants predictability, safety, superiority, validation. But the self, the true self, wants wholeness. And wholeness requires truth. Even when it's ugly, even when it's painful, even when it means seeing how you've been the architect of your own cage. Jung called this the process of individuation, becoming who you are by integrating what you've disowned. That's why the journey back to yourself feels like a war, because it is. A war between the part of you that wants to stay comfortable and the part of you that wants to be free. And here's the most difficult truth of all: freedom doesn't feel good at first. It feels like grief. It feels like losing your identity, your relationships, your place in the world. Because you're dismantling a system that once kept you safe. But safety is not the same as sovereignty. Safety says, don't upset them. Sovereignty says, I will not betray myself to belong. Safety says, stay small, it's easier. Sovereignty says, I will be whole, even if it's hard. And for a while, those two voices will coexist inside you like enemies. One whispering, be careful. The other roaring, be free. And you will feel the split. You'll feel the old self clinging, begging you to retreat. But if you keep listening not to the fear, but to the truth underneath it, something shifts. You begin to recognize that your fear isn't a sign to stop. It's a signal that you're approaching the edge of who you've been. And what waits beyond that edge is power. Not power over others. Power over yourself. Power to choose your responses. Power to say yes without guilt and no without apology. Power to walk away when something violates your soul, even if it looks logical on paper. Power to live from a place that doesn't need to prove, perform, or please. That's the kind of power that can't be given, only remembered. And once remembered, it changes everything. Because it becomes very hard to manipulate someone who knows where they stand. It becomes impossible to control someone who no longer abandons themselves. And that's what the world fears most, not the rebel, but the sovereign. Not the loud one, but the one who is inwardly unmoved. But you cannot become that version of yourself by avoiding discomfort. You must walk through it. You must sit in the silence of not being understood. You must feel the sting of shedding roles that once defined you. You must risk being seen in your truth, knowing that some will recoil, not because you're wrong, but because they're still asleep. Your awakening threatens their comfort. Your clarity disrupts their control. And that's okay. You're not here to be palatable. You're here to be whole. So let the voices scream. Let the doubts echo. Let the shame arise. But don't run. Don't apologize. Don't collapse. Stand still. Breathe. Watch. And you'll see that none of it is truly yours. It's conditioning. Programming, residue. Let it burn, let it leave, let it die. And in the quiet that remains, something ancient will stir. Not a new identity, not a new label, but something older than all of them. The original you. The one who was never afraid, only hidden. The one who never needed control, only truth. Eventually, all illusions collapse. The performance becomes too heavy. The silence becomes too loud. The life you built around fear begins to crack. And when it does, you're left with something raw. Not glamorous, not triumphant. Just real. The rawness of standing in front of a mirror with no mask. The rawness of admitting I don't know who I am when I'm not pleasing, proving, or pretending. But this is not the end. It is the threshold. Because the moment you stop clinging to control, you begin to awaken a different kind of authority, the one rooted in presence, in alignment, in truth. This is your return to center. And no one can take you there but you. The center is not a place of perfection. It's not peace without pain or strength without fear. It's where all of you is allowed to exist. Your doubts, your desires, your contradictions, your rage. It's where you no longer seek permission to feel what's already true. And from that place, you begin to live differently. You don't react to threats, you respond to values. You don't chase approval, you act from clarity. You don't collapse when misunderstood, you stay rooted because your worth is no longer negotiable. That is what individuation means. Not becoming perfect, becoming whole. The world will still try to pull you back. It will seduce you with comfort, shame you with expectations, bait you with validation. But you'll start to feel the game. You'll see how many people are not living, they're managing, performing, projecting, avoiding. And you'll stop blaming them because you'll understand they're controlled by what they refuse to face. But you are no longer available for that. You have died to the lie that says you are not enough unless. And in doing so, you have become dangerous, not to others, but to the system that profits from your obedience. Schopenhauer wrote that a man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. At first glance, it feels disempowering, but it's the opposite, because what shapes your will, what drives your choices, lives in the unconscious. And until you descend into that depth, until you ask why you want what you want, and whether those desires are yours or inherited, you will remain a puppet. Not because someone is pulling your strings, but because you never questioned who tied them to your soul. The center is where you cut those strings, one by one, gently, brutally, honestly, until what remains is not a puppet, not a persona, not a role, but a self. And the self is not loud. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't argue to be understood. It is quiet, steady, certain, because it knows. It knows what is real, what matters, what can no longer be negotiated. And when you live from that place, even if your hands are shaking, even if your voice is raw, you are no longer controlled. Not by fear, not by conditioning, not by projections, guilt, or threats. You have nothing to prove and everything to honor. That is your liberation. But let's be honest, there will be loss. You will lose relationships built on your silence. You will lose jobs built on your compliance. You will lose comfort built on your erasure. But what you gain is something sacred, your own trust, your own authority, your own alignment with the truth beneath your skin. And that is not something that can be taken. It can only be forgotten. And now you remember, so when the fear returns as it will, when the voice whispers, "Be careful," when the old patterns beckon with their false comfort, you don't need to fight. You simply return. Return to center. Return to the knowing that nothing controls you unless you let it. Not the past, not the fear, not the person in front of you, not the story in your head. Only the truth has power now. And the truth is, you are not here to obey. You are here to awaken. Let the world call you difficult. Let them say you've changed. Let them misunderstand your silence. You owe no one your captivity. Your soul was not made for chains. It was made for depth, for fire, for sovereignty. And now, you're free. How to become untouchable the Jungian way. There's a kind of strength that doesn't shout, it doesn't flex, it doesn't seek validation. It simply watches, it knows, it waits. And when the world pushes, it does not move. Not because it's stubborn, but because it's anchored somewhere deeper than the world can reach. This kind of strength is what makes a person untouchable, but not in the way you think. Not through dominance or power games, not by building walls around your heart, and certainly not by pretending not to care. What makes someone truly untouchable, psychologically, emotionally, even spiritually, is their intimacy with the darkness within them, the shadow, the chaos, the archetypes they once feared, and the pain they finally stopped running from. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." This is the beginning, not of perfection, but of sovereignty. Because until you accept yourself, you will always be negotiating your worth through the eyes of others. You will always be threatened by rejection, haunted by shame, and manipulated by your need to belong. You will always be touchable, controlled not by others, but by your unconscious reactions to them. What makes you vulnerable isn't the world. It's your unexamined need for the world's approval. And so long as that need remains hidden in shadow, you will dance like a puppet to the strings of every insult, every ghost of abandonment, every mirror that reflects a version of you you're still afraid of. To become untouchable, you must go inward, not upward, not forward, inward. And this inward path is a descent into the parts of yourself you've denied, disowned, and disfigured just to survive. The first step: realize that what triggers you reveals you. The person who insults you isn't your enemy. They are your mirror. The one who criticizes you, their words only cut because they strike an already open wound. When you become aware of this, you gain power. Not over them, but over the part of you that still needs them to treat you a certain way in order to feel okay. You stop reacting. Not because you've shut down, but because you've woken up. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is everything within us that we've rejected, everything we've buried to maintain the illusion of being good, successful, loved, acceptable. But the shadow never stays buried. It leaks, through envy, through rage, through insecurity, through the silent fear that maybe you're not enough. And every time someone touches that nerve, you feel it. That internal collapse, that impulse to explain yourself, to lash out, to retreat. That's how you know the shadow still owns you. And this is the irony: until you face your shadow, you will remain deeply vulnerable. Not just to others, but to your own unconscious self-sabotage. Jung didn't teach power through suppression. He taught power through integration. To become untouchable is to become whole. And to become whole is to stop running from your sadness, from your rage, from the fact that part of you wants to dominate, manipulate, punish, and control. You become untouchable when you no longer pretend to be above the very darkness that lives inside every human being. When you can hold your rage without being consumed by it. When you can feel your envy without being devoured by it. When you can watch your shame without letting it define you. Then, and only then, do you become sovereign, unshakable. Not because nothing can touch you, but because you've touched the depths within yourself that nothing external can surpass. The world teaches us to armor up, to be strong by being hard, to detach, to never let anyone see our weakness. But this is the lie. Real power is not the absence of feeling, it's the capacity to sit with your feelings without needing to react. Real strength isn't putting on a mask, it's being able to remove it and still recognize yourself in the mirror. The Jungian path is not about being unaffected. It's about being deeply affected and still choosing to respond from consciousness rather than compulsion. The untouchable man or woman has been to hell and came back with eyes that can see. They've walked through humiliation. They've faced the unbearable guilt of their past. They've stared into the abyss of who they could become if they lost control. And instead of running from it, they studied it, sat with it, danced with it. That's why you can't manipulate them, because they already know their darkness. They don't need you to hide it for them. That's why your judgment can't control them, because they've already judged themselves and survived. That's why your rejection can't break them, because they no longer abandon themselves. You become untouchable when the world no longer decides who you are. And the world no longer decides who you are. When you've made peace with who you are. Even the parts that aren't pretty. Even the parts that no one applauded. Even the parts that got you exiled, laughed at, betrayed, or ignored. This is the journey most people avoid. Because it's not glamorous. It doesn't feed the ego. It starves it. It humiliates it. It strips you down to the rawest version of yourself and dares you to stand there without flinching. But when you do, when you stop apologizing for your depth, your sensitivity, your intensity, your truth, you become something the world can't touch. Not because you're above it, but because you're no longer ruled by it. There comes a point in your inner work when you realize that most of the world is acting. Polite masks, strategic emotions, curated personalities built for survival. You see it in their eyes. You hear it in their rehearsed words. They're not lying maliciously. They simply don't know who they are without the role. But once you've begun the descent into your own unconscious, once you've faced the uncomfortable truth about your own desires, your wounds, your manipulations, your hunger for control, you can never unsee it. And with that sight comes power. Not the kind that makes you superior, but the kind that makes you free. Free from the emotional games that people play. Free from the need to argue, to prove, to convince. Free from the compulsive need to be understood. You no longer try to manage others' perceptions because you finally understand that their perception of you is not a reflection of your truth, it's a projection of their unconscious. When they mock you, it's about their fear. When they attack you, it's about their pain. When they dismiss you, it's about their disconnection. You don't react not because you're numb, but because you see. And this seeing is what makes you untouchable. The Jungian way is not to rise above humanity, but to descend fully into it until you've touched the archetypal roots of your own psyche. Until you've met the warrior, the trickster, the outcast, the orphan, the king or queen, the magician, the destroyer. These are not myths. They are psychological energies. They are forces that live in your unconscious, shaping your choices, your emotions, your identity. And unless you learn to recognize their voice, you will remain possessed by them thinking it's you when it's not. The untouchable person has met their inner archetypes and made peace. They know when the warrior is needed and when the lover must lead. They know when silence is strength and when confrontation is sacred. They do not reject any part of themselves. They integrate. Integration is not perfection. It is wholeness. And wholeness doesn't mean every part of you is polished. It means every part of you has a place. Your grief has a place. Your rage has a place. Your jealousy, your longing, your confusion, all of it is part of the human experience. And when you stop judging yourself for feeling, when you stop trying to fix yourself for being messy or intense or non-linear, you step out of the trap. The trap of self-improvement addiction. The lie that says you must become someone else in order to be enough. True transformation isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming truer. And truth is raw. Truth is inconvenient. Truth often costs you the things you thought you needed, like approval, predictability, or praise. But in that loss, something deeper is found. Something no one can take from you. A sense of inner rightness. A sacred defiance. A soul-anchored knowing that says, I will not betray myself again. Most people are afraid of their own strength because they confuse it with aggression. But real strength doesn't dominate, it radiates. It doesn't control, it commands. Quietly, calmly, consistently. And that quiet command is born in the place where you've died before, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, and chose to rise anyway. That's why no one can intimidate you. Because you've already survived what used to destroy you. You've already walked away from the relationships that made you forget yourself. You've already endured the silence that followed your truth. You've already faced the pain of letting go of your false self. And what remains now is real. This realness is not loud. It doesn't need to boast about its worth. It doesn't need to defend itself in arguments. It doesn't need a crowd to echo it. It simply is. And in a world addicted to pretending, that kind of presence is magnetic. It's disruptive. It unsettles people because it exposes what they've been avoiding in themselves. That is another reason why untouchable people are often misunderstood. People will project onto them, criticize them, try to dim them. Not because they're wrong, but because their clarity confronts the fog others live in. This is where many retreat. They dim themselves to stay connected. They pretend to be confused so others feel safe. They hide their boundaries behind politeness. But this is the last test. If you abandon yourself now, the cycle continues. If you choose truth over connection, you find something more powerful than belonging. You find congruence. Your inner and outer world finally match. No more pretending, no more performance, just presence. Jung taught that individuation is not just a psychological task, it's a spiritual one. It is the process of becoming whole, not by rising above the world, but by being radically honest within it. And honesty always costs you something. Sometimes it costs you comfort, sometimes approval, sometimes relationships. But what you gain is sacred, a direct relationship with your own soul. And when you have that, you are never truly alone again. To become untouchable, you must be willing to be misunderstood, to be feared, to be projected onto, and to stay rooted anyway. This doesn't make you heartless, it makes you sovereign. You stop living in reaction to life and begin living in creation. You create boundaries not as walls, but as sacred lines that protect your energy. You speak truth not to attack, but to stay clean within yourself. You love deeply, but never at the expense of your own center. And perhaps most of all, you forgive yourself. For the years you spent asleep. For the masks you wore to survive. For the ways you betrayed your own intuition just to be accepted. You stop resenting the world for not seeing you because you finally see yourself. And that sight is enough. There's a silence that follows awakening, not the silence of emptiness, but of clarity. A stillness that emerges when the war inside you begins to end, not because the battle is won, but because you finally stop fighting yourself. This is the final layer of becoming untouchable. When you no longer need the world to validate your journey. When you no longer demand closure from the ones who hurt you. When you no longer seek permission to be exactly who you are. You are no longer running, proving, reacting. You are simply here, present, whole, enough. And it is in this state that the untouchable man or woman truly emerges. Not as someone above life, but as someone finally aligned with it. You do not resist reality, you move with it. You do not crave control, you embody responsibility. You do not seek love, you become the source of it within yourself. And from this inner fullness you give, not to gain favor, not to be praised, but because it's natural, because your cup overflows. That's the paradox. When you stop needing love, you become love. When you stop chasing power, you embody it. When you stop seeking safety, you realize you already are. Jung understood that the self, the totality of who we are, conscious and unconscious, is not something we achieve through striving. It is revealed through surrender. Surrendering to what is real inside you. The sorrow you didn't grieve. The truths you couldn't say. The parts of yourself you tried to kill just to fit in. When you turn toward these, not away, you begin to remember what was never broken. You were never incomplete. You were simply buried under layers of survival. And now, piece by piece, you return to yourself. But here's the truth no one wants to say. Becoming untouchable requires death. Not physical death, but ego death. The death of illusions. The death of the victim's story. The death of the fantasy that one day the world will finally recognize your worth. It won't. At least, not in the way your wounded self once hoped. Because it's not supposed to. That recognition is your task, your responsibility, your rite of passage. No one can give you your wholeness but you. No one can declare your value but you. The moment you see this not just intellectually but viscerally is the moment everything changes. You stop waiting and you start becoming. You become the mirror that no longer distorts, the presence that no longer flees, the soul that no longer hides. You walk into rooms and feel everything, but you are owned by nothing. You can hold rejection without collapse. You can hear criticism without shrinking. You can see someone's pain without absorbing it. You are no longer touchable by the world's chaos because you've made peace with your own. And this peace is not soft, it is forged. Forged through choices that cost you, through truths that shook you, through nights where you questioned everything and mornings where you still rose. You become untouchable not by avoiding the fall, but by falling, breaking, and rising without bitterness, without closing, without losing your humanity. Because what makes you powerful is not what you hide, it's what you've embraced. So let the world think what it wants. Let them misunderstand your silence. Let them call you cold when you don't perform the way you used to. That's not your burden. Your task is to remain faithful to your own soul, to protect your inner fire without apology, to walk away when your spirit contracts, to say no without explanation, to say yes without fear. This is what maturity looks like, not perfection, but self-possession. And what happens when you live like this? You no longer attract chaos. Or if you do, it doesn't stay. Because your nervous system no longer mirrors dysfunction. You no longer tolerate one-sided love. You no longer beg to be chosen. You no longer dim your truth to preserve peace. You realize that peace built on self-abandonment is not peace. It's quiet oppression. And you refuse to participate in your own suppression. So who are you now? You are someone who has met your shadow and lived to tell the truth. You are someone who has stood in the wreckage of your old identity and chosen rebirth over repetition. You are someone who no longer needs to be untouchable in the defensive sense, because you have become untouchable in the truest sense, integrated, rooted, sovereign. This is the Jungian way, not a path of perfection, but of profound honesty, not a life without pain, but a life without pretense, not a journey of becoming someone else, but of returning to who you've always been underneath the noise. And now, you know, untouchable is not a title. It's not an image. It's not a shield. It's a state of being, a state born from the deepest kind of courage, the courage to face yourself fully, feel yourself completely, and still choose to stand in your center, especially when the world tries to pull you away. So walk, not away from life, but toward yourself. Walk with the quiet power of someone who remembers who they are. Walk not to escape, but to embody. Walk with a stillness that trembles the ground beneath you. Because when you carry your soul like this, nothing controls you. Nothing defines you. Nothing owns you. You are not here to impress. You are here to express. And that expression, that truth, that silence, that fire is what makes you untouchable. The truth about why you react. There's a moment so small, so fast, you almost miss it. A look on someone's face, a tone in their voice, a word, not even a cruel word, just one that lands in that exact place. And suddenly you're gone. Not physically, but internally, emotionally, psychologically. You're not responding to the present anymore. You're reliving something, defending something, protecting something. Something old, something raw, something that was never resolved, only buried. This is what it means to react. You think you're angry because of what they said. You think you're sad because of what just happened. But the truth is far more haunting. You're not reacting to this moment. You're reacting to the wound it touches. Most people live here. Not in the world, but in the loop. The loop of the past reactivating itself under the disguise of the present. And they call it personality. They call it being sensitive, or passionate, or short-tempered. But behind every reaction is a fracture, a hidden memory, an unmet need, a disowned part of the self screaming to be felt. But it doesn't come out gently. It comes out as resistance, rage, withdrawal, sarcasm, over-explaining. People don't react to reality. They react to their story of it. And that story is stitched together from every unprocessed moment they were never allowed to feel, understand, or grieve. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Most people never make this journey. They don't want to. Because to look beneath your reaction is to meet the child who wasn't safe, the teenager who wasn't seen, the adult who keeps pretending, and every reaction you have is that unhealed self trying to take the wheel. Not because it's manipulative, but because it's terrified. Your triggers aren't weaknesses. They're encrypted messages from the unconscious. The problem is when you don't read the message, you become it. Think of it like this: someone touches your arm lightly, but your skin is burnt. Not from them, from something before. That burn is your shadow. The part of you you never acknowledged. The part of you that still bleeds every time something brushes against it. You flinch. You recoil. You attack. You shut down. Not because of the touch, but because of the pain already living under it. This is why we overreact. We underreact. We ghost. We cling. We people please. Not because of who they are, but because of who we couldn't be when it first hurt. You are not broken because you react. You are human. But if you don't examine your reactions, they will own you. They will cost you love. They will distort truth. They will turn every relationship into a battlefield, every opportunity into a threat. Because your nervous system doesn't know what's now and what's then. It only knows safety or danger. So if you were taught that love came with silence, criticism, abandonment, then healthy attention will feel suspicious. If you were taught that anger was dangerous, then expressing a boundary will feel like a betrayal. The reaction is not a flaw. It's a survival code. But here's the truth: most people avoid the moment you react. Is the moment you're no longer in control, because your unconscious has taken over. That means your past is living through you. Your parents' voice, your childhood belief, your unmet longing. You're not choosing, you're repeating. You're not speaking, you're echoing. And this is what Jung called being possessed by the unconscious. He didn't mean demons. He meant memories, complexes, emotional imprints, forces inside you that act without your consent because you never made them conscious, because you never listened to their story. To react is human. but to stay unaware of why. That's what keeps you stuck, keeps you reliving the same pain in different costumes, the same betrayal with different faces, the same loneliness in different cities, until you stop blaming the world and start tracing the pattern back to its origin. Your nervous system will keep searching for familiar wounds to reenact. And you'll keep calling it fate. It's subtle, it's painful, and it's honest. You react because something inside you is still waiting. Waiting to be protected, to be heard, to be chosen. But it keeps choosing defense instead of healing. Reaction instead of reflection. Noise instead of silence. Not because it's weak, but because it's scared. And the only way out of this loop is to slow down enough to listen, not to the world, but to the one inside you who was silenced. And the longer you avoid that voice, the louder the world will trigger it. Every reaction is a mirror, not of what's happening, but of what's unresolved. When someone offends you, disrespects you, or simply ignores you, and it shatters your peace, you must ask what part of me needed that not to happen. And why most people never ask. They defend. They justify. They say that's just how I am. But how you are was shaped by silence, by praise that came only when you performed, by love that disappeared when you said no. And now, those invisible wires are pulling at your mind every time life doesn't go your way. You're not reacting to them, you're reacting to the meaning you gave to what they did. And that meaning was decided by a much younger version of you. This is where psychological time begins to distort reality. The past isn't behind you, it's living inside you. According to Jung, the unconscious is not just repressed memory, it's a living psychic reality, an energy field full of images, beliefs, and wounded selves that haven't found expression. They leak out through behavior, through projection, through overreaction. And when you feel it, that surge of anger or shame or fear, it's never just about now. It's the psyche screaming, "You still haven't looked at me." Why do you think people react most strongly to the things they deny in themselves? The loudest critic is often hiding shame. The one obsessed with loyalty usually fears abandonment. The one who always needs to be right is terrified of being seen as weak. These reactions are masks, compensations, a way to avoid the truth that lives beneath them. And here's the tragic part: the more you avoid your own shadow, the more power it gains. You think you're avoiding pain, but you're feeding it. You're letting it grow in silence, until it bursts through your behavior and ruins what you claim to love. Freud believed we repress the intolerable. Jung took it further: we become possessed by it. So that very part of yourself you don't want to face, it becomes you in your weakest moments. That's the unconscious at work. That's why you say things you don't mean. That's why you sabotage what you care about. That's why you push away what you want most. Because your reactions are trying to protect you not from reality, but from memory. From the pain of reliving helplessness. And ironically, by avoiding it, you recreate it. Here's something most people don't realize: reaction is not just emotional. It's neurological, it's physical, it's cellular. When you were young, your nervous system encoded how to survive, not how to feel, not how to reflect, but how to avoid pain at all costs. So when something feels familiar, even slightly, your body reacts before your mind has a chance to intervene. That look your partner gives you. It resembles the look your father gave when he was about to explode. That text that's left on, read. It echoes the silence you felt when your mother withheld affection. You don't know this consciously, but your body does. And that's what makes the reaction feel so true. Because it's not just about thought, it's about survival. That's why it's so hard to stop. Because your reaction is a protector. A bodyguard for the parts of you that once had no defense. It steps in fast, brutal, uncompromising, and yet it often hurts more than it helps. Because the protector you built in the past doesn't understand who you've become in the present. It's still fighting a war that ended long ago. And so you self-sabotage. You react as if you're still powerless, still invisible, still unloved. And in doing so, you reinforce the very reality you're trying to escape. What you call your triggers are really sacred teachers. The reaction is the flare, the signal, the entry point to liberation if you dare to follow it inward. But that's the thing, isn't it? Most people don't want to go inward. They want the world to change so they don't have to. They want others to behave better, to never touch their wounds. But that's not growth, that's avoidance. That's immaturity dressed up as self-righteousness. Because here's the raw truth. Life is not responsible for avoiding your triggers. You are responsible for understanding them. When someone says something that cuts deep and you instantly feel attacked, you have a choice. You can lash out, collapse, disconnect, or you can pause. You can feel the heat, the rise, the storm inside. And instead of reacting, ask, what does this remind me of? The question is a doorway. And most people will never walk through it. Because the moment you do, you meet the original pain, the heartbreak, the humiliation, the fear of abandonment. And that's where the real work begins. The truth is, you don't react because you're weak. You react because you were once unprotected. You react because your psyche learned to build armor faster than you could build words. But now, you're not that child anymore. You have the power to sit with discomfort, to breathe through intensity, to unlearn the reflex and relearn presence. But that means letting go of the illusion that the world is the problem. The world isn't poking your wounds on purpose. It's showing you they're still open, still bleeding, still in need of your attention. There is a quiet terror inside those who react often. Not the kind you scream about, but the kind you carry in silence, the fear that if you don't defend yourself, no one will. That if you don't control how others see you, you'll be humiliated again. That if you don't shut down, you'll be hurt again. These aren't conscious thoughts. They live in the body, in the instinct, in the survival memory. And that's the key. Most reactions are not decisions. They're activations. They're echoes. You're not reacting because you're unreasonable. You're reacting because you're trying to stay safe. But here's what you must understand. There's a difference between protection and presence. And most of your reactions are not about protecting truth. They're about protecting the wound that truth threatens to expose. That's why sometimes the person who gets close to your heart is the one you push away. The compliment you receive is the one you immediately distrust. The opportunity that could change your life is the one you unconsciously sabotage. Because anything unfamiliar, even if it's good, feels unsafe to a nervous system wired for defense. The truth is, you don't fear what they'll do to you. You fear what you'll feel if they do. When Jung spoke of individuation, he meant becoming whole, integrating what's unconscious into consciousness. And your reactions are road signs. They point you toward the shadow, the exiled fragments of your psyche, the shame you never acknowledged, the grief you never wept, the rage you never allowed. Not because you didn't want to, but because the world around you couldn't hold it. So you buried it. And now it surfaces disguised as a reaction. Until you face it, you'll live as a puppet of your pain. Not because you choose to, but because your wound has a voice and it knows how to speak through your behavior. Think of how often you replay scenarios in your head. The argument you lost, the comment that stung, the moment you felt small. You rehearse responses, comebacks, explanations. But what you're really trying to do is rewrite your emotional history, to find safety in a situation where you felt powerless. That mental loop, it's your mind trying to process what your body never got to release. The problem is, you can't think your way out of an emotional imprint. You have to feel it, safely, fully, without story, without blame. And this is the soul's great challenge, to stop projecting responsibility outward and begin holding it inward. Not in shame, but in maturity. The world is not here to parent your wound. The people around you are not responsible for handling your triggers with perfection. They can try, but they will fail. Because healing doesn't happen in perfect conditions. It happens in your response to imperfection. If someone disappoints you and it crushes you, the work is not to make them change. The work is to ask, why did I build so much of my worth on something so fragile? That's the shadow work. That's the fire where illusions burn. Most people mistake control for safety. They believe that if they manage their image, avoid certain people, set more rules, then they'll be free of pain. But pain isn't out there. Pain is what happens when the self is divided. When one part of you wants to connect and another part still lives in fear. When one part seeks truth and another hides behind the mask. That's why reaction isn't just an emotional issue, it's a spiritual one. Because to react without awareness is to abandon the present moment, to abandon your power, to abandon yourself. And here's the paradox: your greatest strength is hidden inside the very thing that makes you flinch, that place you avoid. That emotional flashpoint, that's where your unlived life is buried. Because underneath the reaction is always a truth, a need, a voice. And beneath that voice is the self, not the ego, not the persona, but the self. Jung described the totality of who you are, including what you reject. To integrate your reactions is to reclaim that self, to step out of the loop, to stop performing your wound, to stop expecting the world to soothe what only inner awareness can hold. Most people are terrified of this work. Because once you see your reaction for what it really is, a memory disguised as a moment, you can no longer play the victim. You realize they didn't make you feel this way. They revealed you still do. And suddenly, you're faced with the choice: evolve or repeat. And that is the threshold, the edge of your old self and the beginning of something deeper. So now you know. Every reaction is a messenger. Every trigger is a key. Every emotional storm you've tried to suppress, outrun, or justify is a doorway. And the truth is, it's never really been about what they said, or what they did, or even what they failed to do. It's been about what it touched, what it woke up inside you, the ancient ache, the invisible scar, the forgotten version of you who never got to finish their sentence, never got to say I'm hurt without being shamed, I'm scared without being mocked, I'm angry without being punished. You are not crazy for reacting. You're carrying stories your mind barely remembers, but your body never forgot. And that's the point. The body always remembers. The nervous system doesn't care about logic. It cares about safety. And when it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't ask for permission. It reacts until you learn to bring your awareness there. Until you stop asking, why did they do this to me? And instead ask, what inside me still needs to be seen? That question is everything. Because you don't get to become who you truly are by avoiding your reactions. You become who you are by studying them, sitting with them, tracing them to their origin, not to blame, but to understand. And once you understand, the pattern starts to lose its power. The same things that used to send you spiraling become signals, invitations, opportunities to choose differently, to breathe, to respond from truth, not trauma, to listen not to the ego's defense, but the soul's need to finally be whole. This is the quiet revolution of self-awareness. You're not trying to be unaffected. You're learning to be unshaken. Because you've built a center that's rooted, not reactive. And when that center grows, you stop chasing people who validate your wound. You stop avoiding discomfort. You stop fearing your own depth. Instead, you start welcoming the triggers not because they feel good, but because they reveal what's still unloved inside you. And what's unloved is the final frontier of your freedom. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's hard. But staying stuck is harder. Performing the same reaction year after year with new faces, new jobs, new cities, that's what breaks the soul. That's what keeps you numb, angry, confused, and lost. So if you've heard anything in this message, hear this. Your reaction is not who you are. It's who you were. Before you had the awareness to choose differently. And now you have that awareness. So the next time you feel yourself triggered, overwhelmed, ready to lash out or shut down, pause. Just for a second. Breathe. Listen. Ask yourself, is this reaction protecting me? Or is it replaying something I haven't yet healed? That question could save your relationship, your peace, your future. And maybe, just maybe, it could save you from the weight of your own unconscious pain. That is how we begin, not with perfection, but with presence. And presence over time becomes power.